Okay, welcome back. We are talking all things FIU Panthers, and no better person to talk FIU Panthers and then with the co-managing editor of Underdog Dynasty. He covers FIU on a daily basis. It also covers Conference USA, hosts a Conference USA podcast, and he's also, which is very interesting to me, is a Biletnikoff Award voter, which recognizes the nation's best wide receiver in college football every year. So I want to welcome Eric Henry to the Florida Football Insiders podcast. Thanks for joining us, Eric.
Not a problem, Jason. Always a pleasure to hop on with a fellow, Tampa guy. It's always
even better. Yeah, I found out you live in Tampa too, so that's even double the pleasure.
Absolutely.
You're out in the Tampa Palms area, which is a nice area. So I was telling Eric, I'm going to be out there this evening refereeing a high school football game again with two of the better teams in Hillsborough County down here. So looking forward to getting out that way tonight as well. So, all right, Eric. So we're going to talk before we get to FIU. I want to talk to you a minute or two about your duties as a voter with the Biletnikoff Award. It's pretty interesting dynamic with wide receivers around the country. They recognize that, you guys recognize the best wide receiver. Let's talk about 4 or 5 guys that are kind of on your radar as we head into the 2022 season of wide receivers. A couple names I'll mention, and then I know you're going to mention a couple names. You got Jordan Addison out at USC, is the big transfer from Pitt. You got Njigba up at Ohio State's going to get a lot of attention. Talk about those guys if you know much about them, and then obviously drop me a couple other names that maybe the fans and audiences don't know about so much.
Sure, yes. This is my second year doing this, Jason. Now, I kind of give you what's kind of my method of doing this here, right? Obviously, covering Conference USA, it's a smaller league, a group of 5 league. So what I like to do is work my way from the smaller leagues up. Guys like Jordan Addison and others, you're going to see them 9 times out of 10 throughout the season, right? And listen, both of those names you mentioned in specificity, Jordan Addison, they should be right there in the top of the rankings there for the Biletnikoff. So those guys are definitely going to be in the mix. But as I mentioned, the way I like to do it is go from the smaller leagues up, just because you're not going to get a chance to see those guys on a day in, day out basis, on ESPN and with the coverage. So I'll give you a handful of names, and this is not a homer pick. I promise, Jason, this is not a homer pick, but I'll start with Tyrese Chambers of FIU, someone who in his first season at the FBS level transferred up from FCS to Sacred Heart. All he did was break T.Y. Hilton's program record for receiving yards and receiving touchdowns in a year. So he's a guy who this offense is looked to run through him. Expect him to see probably someone in terms of catches double those numbers. Then again, if you're going to come from a smaller team, a smaller conference, you're going to have to put up monster numbers, right? Look no further than Western Kentucky. Last year, their quarterback Bailey Zappi set the NCAA mark for passing yards and passing touchdowns in a season. And as a result, they had a ton of receivers. 3 receivers go over 1,400 yards.
Wow.
I don't think they're going to have as many guys go over 1,400 yards just because they don't have as much talent. Mitchell Tinsley's moved on to Penn State. Jarrett Stearns, is in camp right now at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yep.
And they have another player as well who transferred out. So I'm going to give you a name to keep an eye on. That's an Oregon transfer in Dawood Davis. As I mentioned, 3 guys over 1,400 yards. Dawood Davis had almost 800 yards receiving. So that goes to show you where they were in terms of passing proficiency. That same offense is back this year. So I would expect his numbers to be somewhere in the 15, 16, 1,700 yard range.
Wow.
And then the last guy I want to have you keep an eye on is from UTSA, another surging group of 5 program at a Conference USA. Zachary Franklin, he's someone who had 90 catches for 1,100 yards last year. And that offense is going to look to be even more pass heavy with the loss of Sincere McCormick, who was one of the top rushers in all of the nation the past 2 years. Expect them, as they're kind of working through the run game a little bit, bringing in an Arkansas transfer to pass the ball a little bit more. And I think he should easily be a 100 catch guy and somewhere around 1,600 yards as well.
Now, and one of the cool things about group of 5 schools, as opposed to maybe some of the other Power 5 schools, they get lots of catches. These guys at group of 5 schools, they're easily over 100 catches a year. The really good players there. The Stearns kid you talked about, which we know with the Buccaneers, who's turning some eyes with Buccaneer training camp. Those kind of guys, the littler guys, they get fed the ball in those offenses, whether it's bubble screens, all the different ways they get them the ball, but they feed those guys at these smaller schools. When they've got a good player, they figure out ways to get them 100, 110 catches a year.
Jason, one of my kind of favorite sequences, I had a chance to, I covered 3 Western Kentucky games last year. I covered when they came to FIU. covered the Boca Raton Bowl when they broke the record. And then also on and off, covered them at Rice. And one of my favorite sequences, just to kind of give, listeners who may not be familiar with Western Kentucky and that offense, you hit the nail on the head in terms of getting those quick bubble screens, those hitches, those slants. Jarrett Stearns caught 4 straight passes in a hurry up offense. So they started at the 20. He caught a little bubble screen, went for 10 yards. They raced to the line, boom, slant. Race to the line, just, a little screen where he just, all the other guys clear out, he catches it, and then they finish the drive off with a touchdown catch. So that's going to show you those guys are going to get fed the ball, whether it's pass after pass after pass.
No, they, like I said, they do. And obviously those leagues are very, very pass happy, that where you get a lot of, like I said, the Western Kentucky of the world, where they're probably, honestly, they're probably throwing it 70% of the time, as opposed to other teams that want to be a little more balanced. If they're going to, these smaller programs, they'll throw the ball as much as they have to do what they got to get done. All right, let's get to your FIU Panthers, who you cover on a day-to-day basis. Brought in Mike McIntyre, new coach this year. They struggled big time last year, 1-11, had a bad run. The Butch Davis thing kind of ended a little ugly with some of the things going on there with Butch, and some of the comments he made about the program and the commitment and all that stuff. We won't worry about a whole lot of that. The first elephant in the room dealing with the FIU program this year is the passing of Luke Knox. They had in training camp here in the last couple of weeks. The brother of Dawson Knox plays for the Buffalo Bills. Luke Knox was a transfer from Ole Miss, where McIntyre came from. So McIntyre had a relationship with him. Just talk about how that, obviously it's a terrible situation. What happened with the young man. Just talk about how that is the cloud that's been over the program in the last couple of weeks with that whole situation.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there, Jason, in terms of, I honestly want to say it's a cloud, but we tend to forget that as big time college football fans, we love college football. These are young men, 18 to 23, I guess with the COVID year, 18 to 24, 18 to 25, right? But still young kids. So yeah. When one of their peers, passes away, it does take them a while to kind of, as it would any of us, but especially at that age. And with Mike McIntyre, yeah, I think the quote that stuck with me when we were at the press conference last week, in terms of the media availability we had, was he said, hey, he's known the Knox family since he was 16 years old. Yeah. He grew up 10 houses away from, their grandparents. And again, for your audience who may not know, Mike McIntyre was born in Miami, grew up in Nashville, same area that the Knox family is from. So he picked up Luke's parents, picked up his parents from the airport at 1 a.m., and not to say that Mike wouldn't do that for any parent, but I think it just goes to show, the relationship that they had. So definitely a tough situation. But I think the players, there seems to be and it sounds so cliche, but a rallying around Luke. Sure. And that they really, he made an impact on them in a short time, and they really want to honor him in several ways. And I do think they're handling as best they can for, as I mentioned, kids who are between the age of 18 and 25.
No doubt. All right, let's get on the field here. Mike McIntyre, he's been a head coach at a couple other places before, San Jose State, Colorado. The interesting thing here is he did a dramatic turnaround when he was at San Jose State. He took over a program at 1-12 at San Jose State. 2 years later, they won 10 games. He took over Colorado, who was really struggling. A couple years later, they'd won 10 games at Colorado. So he's shown the ability to do this in his past. So that's a great thing for him. I mean, like you said, he's got connections in Miami, which will help with the recruiting. He's got SEC connections, which will help in the transfer portal, those kind of things. So I think he's kind of the perfect guy to bring in for a situation that needs an overhaul.
Yeah, undoubtedly. When the announcement of Mike McIntyre was made as head coach, there was a bit of consternation in South Florida because there were some names with South Florida ties. Tim Harris Jr., James Coley, a couple other guys who either grew up in Miami or were Miami high school coaches. And they really, some of the FIU fan base really wanted one of those guys. But I think for all the reasons that you mentioned, we're seeing why AD Scott Carr chose Mike McIntyre. This wasn't just a situation where it's, hey, we need a new coach, we need a new voice, we need some new X's and O's. This was a situation where you have a program that lost 41 players by the time the spring started.
Wow. Between
transfers, going to the NFL, leaving football, etc. This was building this thing from the ground up. That may have really been too much of an ask for a first-time head coach, right? So you bring in someone like Mike McIntyre, who did it a similar situation in San Jose State, not a traditional college football area, a non-traditional student population there. Same thing at FIU. And then he goes to Colorado and does the same thing. So, and when you talk to Mac, he talks about saying, hey, when I took this job, I knew it was going to be more than X's and O's. It's going to be going out there and meeting that booster, or going out there and meeting that donor, or meeting that fundraiser or whatnot, or, talking to the booster club, trying to build this thing from the ground up. So in that sense, I do think that's proven out as a show, at least, about less than a week from the season, why that's been the right hire. And in terms of on the field, as you mentioned, definitely a lot of connections. I think one of the biggest strategies for them in terms of recruiting has been this. They know that they're not going to get the 4- and 5-star recruit immediately out of South Florida or out of Florida in general. But, and as they've already done, bring in a handful of these guys, as we know this living in Florida, it's one thing to say you want to go to Syracuse or go here or go there, right? And it's another thing to wake up in January and it's 6 degrees and you're suddenly missing Florida. They've got a handful of those kids who, left Florida for a Northern Power 5 school and then realize, hey, this might not necessarily have been what I wanted. And they've come back this year. And some of those guys are going to contribute immediately, in year one.
And the other great thing is that, not that you want to live in the transfer portal, but you're in a great spot where Florida, Florida State, Miami, Central Florida, USF, if you got a kid that's maybe not performing up to his potential as a second or third teamer there, he probably would have a pretty good opportunity to go play at FIU pretty early in his career if he decided to make a change.
Undoubtedly. I mean, I do think, and listen, you can look at programs like UCF and USF. They were built off of those types of players, right? Players who realize, hey, we might not be playing immediately, might be a third stringer, might be an upperclassman, and it's not necessarily getting the reps that they wanted. Come on down to, quote unquote, the lower league, and they've had success. So undoubtedly, that'll be a factor as well.
No doubt. All right. So FIU, the last 18 couple stats before we get into the offense, last 18 games, 1-17 in the last 18. Sacks last year. They allowed 41 sacks, only created 14. So a 3-to-1 ratio of giving up sacks to getting sacks. They lost the time of possession by almost 7 minutes a game, which just puts a brutal impact on your defense. So, all right, let's go offense first. You and I, before we did this, we were talking about the QB battle. Coach McIntyre is going to be announcing a QB here pretty soon. Down to a couple guys. You got a Duke transfer, Gunnar Holmberg, and then you got a Tampa kid, Hayden Carlson, the kid who's out of the Tampa Bay area, battling for the job. What do you sense is the way that they're going to go with the quarterback situation?
Yeah, Jason. It's been a three-way race, actually. I'll throw in another name, Grayson James, a highly touted kid out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, former 3-star recruit. But yes, Hayden Carlson, a name that we may be familiar with as guys who live in Tampa, is the son of Jeff Carlson, certainly, played for the Buccaneers, noted football analyst in this area. And Gunnar Holmberg. Gunnar was the primary starter at Duke last year, started 9 games. I'll say Duke is on the lower end of the Power 5 program. So, it wasn't necessarily a great record on the field, but Gunnar is a guy who can move. He can use his legs. He can certainly, kind of get out there and kind of create plays in that way. And the big thing that they're looking for in David Yost's offense is get the ball out of your hands quickly. You talked about the sacks. Max Bortenschlager, for all the things that he did last year, I believe he set the program record for passing yards in a year. He held onto the ball a lot. And part of that was guys weren't open, but part of that was, hey, just holding on to the football, need to make quicker decisions. So I do think right now it does appear as if Gunnar Holmberg has the inside edge. But, when we spoke to Mike McIntyre, he said that this could go all the way up into game week and we'll be at practice Monday. And I plan on asking him, hey, Mac, you got a guy yet? And, maybe he's announced it internally, but maybe he won't announce it to us until kickoff on Thursday.
And the other thing about this entire roster this year, it's a new coaching staff, so everybody's going to get opportunity. If things aren't, even if they name a starter, no matter what position it is, if a couple of weeks into it, the guy's not doing well, they're not going to be afraid to make a change and give another guy an opportunity because they are looking for players. Whether, again, everybody's slate's clean with a new coaching staff in theory, so it'll be interesting to see how much leash that no matter what position it is, how much leash these guys all get at their different the incumbent starters get. So, all right, wide receivers, not a good running game last year. Running game really struggled. Offensive line's got to get better. Just your general thoughts about the offense. Couple thoughts about the offense going into 2022.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple quick thoughts here. As you mentioned, the offensive line, when you allow that many sacks, they couldn't really get anything going in the run game. It all starts there. So when you have a guy like Lindell Hudson, they also got one of the highest recruits in program history, a former Lakeland Dreadnought, who had signed with Florida initially out of high school, and DAV Hammond went the JUCO route. He now is at FIU. He's expected to bolster that offensive line. Everything's going to run through there. As I mentioned, Tyrese Chambers, the NFL prospect out there at receiver, he is undoubtedly the best offensive player in the running back room. Keep an eye on two guys, Lexington Joseph at running back and the former Armwood Hawk. There we go. Almost blanked on the Armwood mascot there. Former Armwood Hawk and EJ Wilson. They're going to be the 1-2 punch at running back.
All right. Let's go to the defense. Heading into 2022, unfortunately, they were the third worst pass defense in the country in 2021, only 14 sacks, which we talked about. So lack of pressure puts even more pressure on the back four, which probably played into that stat a lot. Talk to me about the defense. What kind of defensive scheme is the new DC going to run? Aggressive zone? What are they looking to do down there?
Well, Mike McIntyre, the former defensive coordinator at Memphis prior to coming here, he's a 3-4 guy. He for the better part of the last decade, he's run 3-4. That's going to be the case here with Jovan DeWitt, who comes in as defensive coordinator. So it's an adjustment, from guys. When you recruit for a 4-3 to a 3-4, that definitely is an adjustment. I think, these first 4 or 5 games are really going to serve as an extended kind of growing process into that system. So it's going to place a lot of pressure on that defensive line. Luckily, they did bring in a few players in terms of the linebackers who have played in 3-4 systems prior. So they have experience. But I think the key to this defense is going to be the secondary. If they can at least provide, a steady presence. And yes, they were bad in pass defense last year, but part of that is because, as you mentioned, you can't generate any pressure. You can't cover forever. If they can at least hold down things for the first quarter of the year until they get adjusted, the front seven, that'll help things.
Looking at the schedule, obviously, I don't think many people have high expectations for a ton of wins. Couple winnable games on the schedule. You got Texas State in early September. You got UConn in October. Looking at the schedule, give me a couple places where you see, hey, they could win a game. And obviously, they kick off the season on Thursday night next week with Bryant, or this week with Bryant. Talk about the schedule a little bit and where there's some opportunity.
It absolutely is going to be in that first quarter of the year. They got to start with the win at Bryant. That's first and foremost. And that's a really veteran team, but they got to start with the win. UConn. We know UConn is struggling. They're going to get them at home. New Mexico State, Jerry Kill, surprised he took over that program because they really struggled under Doug Martin. Potential winnable games. Texas State, I'm still leaning more towards Texas State. They won last year in Miami. Of course, now they go to San Marcos. But, a possible game. After that, their conference schedule, they get UTSA, they get Charlotte, they get some of the tougher teams in Conference USA. So that's going to be tough. Maybe a win with Louisiana Tech, another team that's taking over, Sonny Cumbie taking over there. But I still think this is a 3-4 win team at tops if all things hit right.
Right. And again, for me, as we wrap this up, the thing I think in year one for Mike McIntyre is you want to establish a culture of good habits. The wins on the field are not going to be exceptional, probably barring something unforeseen, but establishing a culture, establishing good work habits, establishing some recruiting base in that part of the state and around the state. Just your general thoughts of what they need to do as a staff to get the program at least going with the trajectory going upward.
Again, I think you hit the nail on the head. This year is the foundational year. As I mentioned, when you lose 41 guys, there were, walk-ons being added to this roster as recently as the beginning of fall. So it's just going to be a matter of replenishing the roster. This is a very, very underclassmen heavy roster. So getting those young guys who have not played at this level, getting them experience. And then again, if you can at least, as you mentioned, you haven't won a lot of games in a while, get a few wins here or there and build some confidence. That to me is a success heading into year 2.
And I think you're going to see from the administration that they understand this is probably a 4 or 5 year project to build this thing back up. FIU's had some good teams and some good runs, with Butch Davis. Maybe they were trying to step a little bit out of their lane a little bit, given the surroundings with Miami, FAU, and those kind of things. But you got to build this program slowly. Does the fan base and the boosters understand that, or do they have the mentality of we want to be good today and hell bent whatever we got to do it? What is the fan base reality? Do they understand? Do they understand where they're at?
That's an iffy question. I think you have a fan base that they're willing to extend a leash because they understand new coach, new AD, they weren't happy with the old regime. That'll buy them a year. But just to be transparent with you, you have a lot of, if you look at FAU, UCF, USF, they all have had much more success in roughly the same period of time as FBS programs than FIU that has had little to no success in 21 years. So I do think after this year, that leash could get short.
Here's one thing I will say that probably will be a benefit to them, and they may not even realize it yet. With Mario Cristobal being at Miami and a former FIU guy, that could be a pipeline to where if Mario realizes that some kids maybe can't play at Miami or aren't good enough, that might be an easy pipeline to say, oh, hey, go to a place that I've been to. Here's a natural landing spot for you. So I think they're going to have a real opportunity in the transfer portal in the next couple of years to get some of those kids maybe that don't pan out at Miami, Florida State, or Florida.
Undoubtedly, most definitely.
All right, Eric, great work, man. Appreciate the time. Again, tell everybody where they can find you and all that good stuff online.
Yeah, you can find my FIU coverage and Conference USA coverage at Underdog Dynasty, which is SB Nation's home for Group of 5 football coverage. And find me on Twitter at EricCHenry_.
And give us the name of the podcast, the CUSA podcast.
Yeah, that is the Underdog Dynasty Conference USA podcast.
There you go. Check it out on all your podcast platforms. Well, Eric, great work. We will have you on throughout the year periodically to give us some more updates. And you are dialed into the college football scene, not just FIU. And obviously you're a Tampa guy, so you go to the top of the list, man.
Like to hear that, man. Appreciate it. Take care, buddy.
You got it, man. Eric, have a great week and good luck with the Panthers.
Absolutely.